Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Bacula Systems and InfoTech Research Group panel discussion on data protection. What are the minimum standards clients are looking for, and what does the future look like? Got our friends from Bacula joining us here today, and we'll do some introductions here momentarily, but just a kind of little bit of an open dialogue as to why we're having this discussion. Here at InfoTech especially, we get a lot of calls from our clients around what are the standards. And one of the main drivers of this is that there's been a lot of change in the data protection industry. And as our expert friends from Bacula will reinforce, it's been quite progressive over the last 3 to 5 years. And that change has really been centered around cybersecurity features that are now embedded within data protection platforms. And it's almost become difficult to determine, who the data protection company versus a cybersecurity product type company and how many features are being embedded within data protection platforms. But there is a distinction, and there is a lot of change and new stuff that's coming. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to do our rounds of introductions. So since I have the mic here, I'll start off. My name is Troy Cheeseman. I'm the advisory practice lead here at InfoTech within the Infrastructure and Operations Group. We've been here for about 5 years, and our infrastructure and operations domain includes many things, of course, across cloud, business continuity and disaster recovery, service management, and data centers, and et cetera. All those wonderful things that make up I&O. And I'll now turn it over to our friends here at Bacula, who's going to help us with this discussion today. And Rob, I'll turn it over to you for an introduction.
Thanks, Troy, and thanks for having us here today. Yeah, my name's Rob Morrison. I'm one of the co-founders of Bacula Systems, and probably most of my professional career I've been working in and amongst open source companies or open source based companies, and that's exactly what Bacula is. So I'm going to do my best to help you and give some insights into the discussion today, and I'll hand it over to Jorge.
Thank you very much, Rob. I'm Jorge, and I'm the current Chief Technology Officer at Bacula Systems since some years now. So I'm not since the beginning like Rob, but I have been involved into the software and backup world like many years too, and also in other software development companies, but always with a close link to this storage and backup world. So I will also try to give my best and my expertise to this discussion.
Excellent. And just one note, obviously, Jorge and I, good technical, been the technical track, you can see within our expertise, but we definitely do not have any head coaching roles at Olympic Games. So Rob, that's something I think we'll dive into. Maybe that's call number 2. I'd love to dive into that, but all that being said, we'll dive into what is our agenda. And our agenda is, we broke it out into 2 20-minute parts. And again, it's not just to talk about what are the basics or what a client should be looking for in a standard data protection product today and solution today, but we're also going to dive into what we think is next. And some of these things are emerging so fast. When we say what's next, it could be launched by a platform next week. It could be launched by a platform in 6 months. But we're going to talk about some of those areas of development and what the industry is potentially going to bring to the consumer. So with that, we'll dive into the minimum standards. And it was interesting when we kind of first started into this topic, and when I first even started to take a look at your product specifically, and we started our conversations, distilling it down to 5 points, it's pretty difficult, to be honest, because there's a lot of great feature sets and standards that are embedded within products. And it's funny, like I said, when I looked at Bacula's product set, it's like, okay, well, what's the standards? Well, it looks like everything. They do everything. So how do we distill this down here? But we did, and we kind of brought it into these 5 points: a single pane of glass, a general management console, multi-cloud and hybrid cloud. And gentlemen, I'm sure you both would agree, there are very few organizations who don't have some sort of multi-cloud footprint now, between SaaS and their own stuff, maybe on-prem and things like that. Data regulations and compliance is an interesting one, because I think as we talk through this a little bit, and we'll dive into these, each one of these, this impacts everybody now, all layers of business, all verticals. It's not reserved just for the enterprise or reserved just for healthcare. This is, far reaching. We will dive into data protection features. We'll talk about just a couple features that are really bare minimums, and it's absolutely essential. And then, of course, cybersecurity capabilities, which the integration of all these great features and anomaly detection products and services is kind of what's driving us to say, hey, what are some of those standards? All right, so gentlemen, single pane of glass, management console. This is something that's been talked about for a long time. Right?
Yeah, it certainly has. And, why is it so important? I think really, look, if you don't have that, then you're possibly right off the bat, you're not going to be efficient enough to be able to adequately or do best practices data protection in the first place. I mean, that's harsh, but I think true. And it can also impact your security levels if you don't have the overview that you need that single pane of glass is going to give you. So your selection has to have the ability to protect many different architectures and technologies. That's what helps you to protect you from the tomorrows and gives you a preparation for what's coming tomorrow. So yeah, I really believe strongly in this. A single pane of glass control and management is really high up there.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that this can be seen from several points of view. And one of them is that before it was enough, let's say, to touch the backup world from a file perspective or from a blog perspective. There are tools that are great doing that. But today is like you need to be sure that your tool is covering all the different levels. And this means that you can talk directly with hypervisors and take the data at that level, or to software as a service data, or applications or databases, or NAS world. I mean, all of those levels should be included in your tool. And also the point of being a single pane of glass is going to ensure that you can manage all of those different elements through your policies, so in an integrated way. Because if you need to touch many different tools with many different languages and ways of doing things, it's going to be much more difficult to align all of that. And I would say that the last point that is important here is not only to be prepared for today, but also be prepared for tomorrow, because the diversity is greater than ever, but also everything is very dynamic. I mean, everybody's using new applications, adding new services, and you need to make sure that your tool has covered more things that the ones that you are currently using, because that can change over time.
Agreed. And interesting note here around hypervisor diversity. I can tell you that InfoTech, especially over the last, call it 7-8 months, maybe even 9 months, we've had a lot of conversations about hypervisors and potentially clients evaluating different hypervisor solutions for various different reasons. We don't need to dive into that. But it's interesting that from a global management console or single pane of glass side, if a client is looking at a hypervisor or a VM type alternative, this single pane of glass is important to kind of give them that view and perhaps even help them with that migration if they decide to do so.
Yeah, having the flexibility to do that is key. And also, I think it's really important that when you are considering what VM type you may want to use tomorrow, and sometimes today you don't know that, so you want to have a solution that's got the breadth and the flexibility to give that single pane glass management, whatever solution you might choose tomorrow. And that's really important, because that means you're in the driving seat and you're not being controlled by limitations in what your data protection solution can do.
Exactly. I think that's a key concept, because in a way, a tool that has support for different sources of the same kind of data, and we are talking now about hypervisors, but we could talk about databases or others, in a way is giving you the ownership of your data, because it removes this lock-in with a given vendor, and allows you to plan or to be covered in case of future migration needs. So I think it's really important.
Excellent. And Jorge, even through the conversation, we were talking about multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, as you even from a single pane of glass view, having the protection within a multi-cloud environment, a hybrid cloud environment, it's an absolute must. And I mean, and it's beyond just when I say beyond the hyperscalers like the Azure and AWS, it's about SaaS, it's about your infrastructure as a service. It's the AAS component, right? Where you need to be able to have that full protection across the board.
Yeah, it really is. And again, it's back to the basics of making sure that the data protection solution that you're building towards has got that flexibility so that you've got the options you need in the future. If your solution doesn't cope with or connect to different clouds, you're going to be terribly constrained going forwards. If you cannot leverage multi-clouds for data protection, and again, you might not know the ones that you need to take advantage of tomorrow. If you can't do that, you're potentially into a really higher level of risk with your data, if only from a disaster recovery point of view. So again, flexibility is key.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to be for the tool to be specific on what is allowed on that flexibility, because one aspect of it is how to deploy the solution. So maybe the solution can work on-premise, in the hybrid cloud or pure cloud, but then is how it can work with, let's say, native cloud services. And you mentioned some of them, Troy. So we could be talking about protecting data from SaaS, IaaS, or databases as a service, but we could talk also about sending data to the different cloud storage services. So you need to make sure that all the three levels are really good covered, so you can deploy everywhere, but then you can get the data from any of the different sources, but you can also send it to any of those storage offerings that we know that for some use cases may have very attractive pricing structures. So it's very, very important here.
Yeah. And, just like every company of every size now, enterprise, medium enterprise, a small business, so like we kind of stated, they're going to have some sort of multi-cloud footprint, whether they know it or not. But they also now all have to deal with a level of compliance and data regulation that they, maybe many organizations felt that they didn't have to deal with before. But as we highlighted, I think in the beginning, the compliance and those types of regulations, they're reaching all the way down to the small business. So from a data protection standard, minimum, it's just important to have a product that's going to have to help you meet whatever need that is.
Well, yeah, compliance, it's a big one. I think everyone knows by now that compliance is coming really fast. And for many, it's here right now. And so if your backup solution or your data protection solution isn't compliant, or actually even just able to demonstrate how it is compliant, then you might be about to go through a lot of pain. It's another good example, really, why single pane of glass management is important. Many of these things are linked together. What do you think, Jorge?
Yeah, I think that it's more and more important every year that passes. So I think that from a backup tool perspective, you need to ensure, again, this flexibility that we were talking about. So you are, first of all, able to align with the different requirements of each of those regulations. But second, it's also to be able to monitor and to ensure that you are good with each of them. So I think those are the two most important aspects.
Yeah, and Rob, I think you touched on it. It was the word pain. Very early in my career, I was with an organization, and we had failed an audit from a compliance perspective, and the word pain thereafter is the best way to describe it. It is nothing but painful, and we did end up passing, thankfully, and with a little bit of therapy, I was fine, so it was good. But compliance is one of those things. It's easy to ignore. But when you have impact, it's a lot of pain, and it's a lot of time and a lot of expense. And that's where, we could almost say the same thing around a certain basic set of data protection features that are absolute minimums. And this list, some people may look at this list and think around, well, what about X and what about Y feature? And you can get into a big feature debate. But it's still shocking to me that I speak with clients, and I'm sure you guys have this with some clients as well, where they're still contemplating whether immutability is a good thing to turn on or not. And to me, whether it's software or hardware, I just think it's an absolute bare minimum.
Yeah. Wow. There are literally hundreds of items that go into a comprehensive data protection system to bring in the necessary high levels of security that are needed. And I would venture that some backup solutions still have some ways to go, actually, before they catch up with the actual threat levels of today. And they're miles off regarding the threat levels of tomorrow. Some people won't like to hear this, but if possible, just an example, have your backup server running on Linux. Anything else likely to be less secure, and it's just not an area where you want to compromise on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think here maybe is one of the fields where we could say the shift good to have to a bare minimal is stronger, right? Because is, as you said, immutability before was a concept. Some people was doing it, and today I would say it's a real must, because it's let's say in the own backup idea, right? If you are moving your data, if you are moving a status of your data to a safe place, the last thing you want is to have it modified, right? So this is like the ultimate solution to avoid that to happen, because there are also other mechanisms. We are mentioned there, one of them, which is the verification of the data. So maybe some systems do not allow to do immutability, and then you can cover it with this kind of secondary process where you check that everything is right. But having immutability, and today we know that backup tool can be well integrated with NAS immutability, cloud immutability, or the tape immutability.
Yep.
I would say it's really key, something that definitely needs to cover it.
So one of the things, sorry, go ahead, Rob.
Well, I was just going to broaden that kind of conversation about immutability, because we see a lot at Bacula where immutability is touted by some providers, and quite rightly so, it's important, but what they're talking about is software-based immutability. Now, that can be a great thing, and everything has its uses in the right place, but not to be confused, of course, with hardware-based immutability, because that's like a physical switch that provides true immutability, because it creates a barrier that can't be overridden by software or network commands. So, for example, once a write protect switch on a tape is engaged, it's physically impossible to modify or delete data until that switch is manually disengaged. And that can be really, really important. Software-based immutability, on the other hand, relies on logical controls in the storage system for the way it's going to prevent data from being altered or deleted for a set period. And while that can be really effective when it's used in the right way, that depends totally on the integrity and the security of the software and the underlying infrastructure. So it means that if attackers gain administrative access, they may bypass or disable those immutability features. So, for example, while Bacula supports both its military and research or government customers, of course, will typically be leaning towards using hardware-based immutability for their critical data.
Yeah, and I think the other features that we have listed here, I think we have certain clients listening or watching this a little bit later, they're not going to disagree with, the encryption and multi-factor. I mean, multi-factor authentication, again, is a basic, right? And something that has granular role-based access. But multi-person authorization is an interesting one, right? That might be, I wouldn't say raise an eyebrow, but that we go, okay, what does that really mean, multi-person authorization?
Yeah, I think that's also, let's say, relatively recent concept in our industry, because in other industries, I would say it was already present, at least let's think about the movies where two people needs to put a key somewhere and they are both at the same time to open some door or something like that, right?
Yeah.
So here it's the same concept, actually, maybe not at the same time, but some operations that are really critical. Let's say removing information, deleting backup, or maybe, as Rob said, if your immutability is software-based, maybe you have some permission to switch it on or switch it off. So it's really a critical operation. So the concept of multi-person authorization is where you need more than one person to approve that operation. And given the criticality of backup solutions, I think this is where we are putting it here like a basic that everyone should have, because we think that's the reality, but it's not, let's say, a standard on the industry yet, I would say.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good point, right? And the clients need to be mindful of, maybe a feature like this could be available, but, it could be a part of a different subscription service or things like that. But in the way of a level of standard for protection, we know threat actors and those in that space, if they gain access, one of the first things they do is they go for the backup environment, right? Because they know that they have the keys then, right? So this is where cybersecurity capabilities and that, whether it's scanning at the time of backup or post, et cetera, like anomaly detection, things like that, it is absolutely critical as well.
Yeah, you brought a very important point, which is that the backup solution is, a critical point because it usually has a lot of different access to your data. So first of all, you need to make sure that it's built in a very secure way. And of course, after all of this that we are talking here, so to help you in a way to enforce all the data access controls where you are really sure that everybody is accessing the data he should be accessing and not any other.
So around anomaly detection is one part, being able to detect something within your backup environment, but also remediation, right? And clear steps to remediation, whether that means, here we say, integrating with SIEM or SOARs. It could also be, having a defined incident and critical incident response type process. But that remediation aspect is something that's very important as well. It's one thing to perhaps have a level of detection, but if you don't know what to do, you're kind of in trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. And, as Jorge mentioned up, the irony, if you like, of all this, but the challenge is that the backup systems, it's protecting the most critical data that an organization has. And that is exactly what a threat actor is trying to access. I see a lot of backup solutions really where the inherent architecture of the backup solution itself has actual vulnerabilities. So for example, if a software client or a piece of code on the server that has the data being backed up is able to be hijacked or compromised in some way and then turned against the very backup system itself, all of that hypercritical data is suddenly in deep trouble. It's just the worst possible scenario. And so there are big differences that we see in how fundamentally secure different backup solutions are. And you already touched upon that a little bit, Troy.
Yep.
I think with remediation, the integration that you can have with different systems becomes really important. And open APIs are key, aren't they? Open APIs are great. We love those. They give us accelerated innovation, development, right across the IT landscape. They drive growth, agility. It's so important. It helps Bacula with customer engagement across industries. So for Bacula, means our developers can leverage pre-existing functionalities instead of, building them from scratch. So it means we can release more features more quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that we know that, and you mentioned at the beginning, Troy, that backup or many backup solutions are like presenting themselves as the whole solution for cybersecurity, or at least as a one cybersecurity solution. Of course, we think that the backup needs to do everything that is possible, and it means all of the things we are talking here about detection and remediation and even more. But the reality is also that there are some things in the organization that are not directly covered or touched by the backup solution. So usually you need another tool where you can see, let's say, from a global security perspective, what is happening. And in this scenario, it would be a mistake to try to just use the backup solution to cover everything.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it's here where we think that is better, or at least we need to do that as well, to integrate with those more global solutions where you can see everything. And then open APIs are the key here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You're exactly right. All the stuff we talked about, and especially the cybersecurity capabilities, it's a part of the cybersecurity stack, right? As what a client would have as part of their strategy. It's not the single answer on that side, and that's a very good point, because when you're doing it, especially during your backup at that particular point in time and that detection, there's many layers that have been accessed to get there, right?
It's a huge subject. Yeah.
Right.
It really is. I always give a wry smile when, hearing about solutions that just bolt on some antivirus tool to their backup solution and then try to brainwash us all that their solution is safe from ransomware. It just isn't that simple. And for me, it's absolutely clear from the dreadfully high success rate of threat actors today that many of these backup solutions are just not up to it. If you look at the NIST framework and its areas of security, protect, detect, identify, respond, and whatever. If you, for example, in the recover area alone, I believe a good data protection should have at a minimum, it should be able to offer bare metal recovery, single item restore or single item recovery, continuous data protection, cross system restores, definitely auto healing restores, and mass recovery orchestrations. These are the things that are needed.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So, great opening. Talked about a lot of different things. Like I said, we could probably have a series of conversations just on what are the minimum standards and continue on. But now we can talk about what we think is next, right? And predictability, we're putting on our little wizard's hats here and saying this is what we think, or what we're already seeing, to be quite honest, to a certain degree. But as we know, in the rapid world of technology change, anything can happen. So we've distilled this down into kind of 4 very high level points around what we feel will be more and more focus. Predictive and validated compliance is an interesting one. We're kind of talking a little bit around, an idea of being able to detect and help with data classification and perhaps, longer term retention type compliance. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Continuing unified cybersecurity standards. There's not a day that goes by that a data protection platform is not kind of enhancing or adding more cybersecurity standards. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Disaster recovery as a service automation and detection is interesting because there is marketing around that and being able to do a lot of orchestration, but there's an inherent complexity here, and it'll be interesting to see what we think will evolve there. And then, of course, we cannot have any kind of conversation today unless we talk about AI and more automation with AI. But, we have a little caveat on that as a topic as well. So predictive and validated compliance. This is interesting to me. I think in the UK and in EMEA, the DORA compliance for financial services organizations is rapidly approaching, which is really impacting kind of financial services organizations of all size, especially the smaller ones. It's now a lot of regulation, right? And it'd be great if they could have a data protection platform that has access effectively to all the data in every company, right? It does, especially if you're using it properly, that is. It'd be great to have a product that gives me an idea of, am I even meeting my compliance, right? Rather than me having to do audit checks and to do some of those different types of things, it'd be great if it was more predictive in its nature and being able to validate if I need to be DORA compliant or if I need to be HIPAA compliant and things like that.
Yeah, it's a big requirement, and it's right now. And you've mentioned the finance industry, Troy. So that would be DORA, for example, which finance organizations are grappling with as we speak, or in the health industry would be HIPAA, for example. So the Bacula, we're now providing pre-made packages to our customers, and these explain exactly what the requirements are for each different compliance type, and hopefully very helpful to the user, explains exactly how Bacula meets that compliance. So even down to the low engineering level, on a granular level, so that the auditors, whether they're external or internal auditors, can much more easily check it out and be sure about it.
Yeah, I think that here the complexity of this topic is that regulations are typically not simple to understand,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. And they're somewhat vague, and they're somewhat vague sometimes, right? Like, almost not detailed enough, right?
Exactly. And they can be, let's say, interpreted in different ways depending on your kind of company, depending on how you use your data, depending on your field. So I think that now the next step is to integrate this knowledge and translate this complexity in some actionable items that the backup tools or even other tools that are in the field can understand and report to the user and also act upon. So we are, I would say, from a general perspective, in this understanding phase in the industry, I think, in general. So we will see pretty soon more tools that are in the next phase. So
yeah, absolutely. And it'll be interesting, the difficulty of the vagueness, different regulations across different regions, across different, even like in the United States, as an example, there's, even in Canada, there's, data privacy as it relates to state by state, and then there's federal, and then there's, overarching kind of industry standards. It's an immensely complex issue, but one that is now not touching any business. So it's an opportunity for sure. Obviously, we're going to see a lot more around cybersecurity standards. Okay, when we look at the industry, there's a lot of fantastic enhancements. There's now a lot of things happening around pre-backup scanning and during and then post, and there's a lot of good things that are happening there. But a lot of those services are in current state are additional, right? As in, hey, you got to kind of subscribe to a different level of service. And some of the newer things that are coming around, providing more turnkey as it relates to integrating with more SIEM and SOAR and MDR type services, so that from a client perspective, it's just not about detection. It's about taking me from detection to helping me with resolution, to helping me with kind of getting out of my situation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? Like, I think we're going to see more of these standards become part of basic services versus additional subscriptions.
Yeah, I think, those 3 points that we are seeing here are really key, because the first one, of course, we will see better detection in these days of so much AI, because it's one of AI's specialties, to treat data and detect patterns that maybe through other means are not visible. But then what you said, the extra packages, and I would say not even from a commercial perspective, it's also many times a setup perspective, where it's difficult, right? It's difficult to give those security best practices. You need to understand very complex things, and people suffer doing it. So providers will try to give this by default, and that's one of the main things that we are trying to do in Bacula. And also the last one, we talked about integration just in the step before with these external security tools. So of course, the next step is not only to be prepared to integrate with them, but provide already prepared integrations that are ready to be deployed very easily.
Yeah, absolutely. A quick little story. I was with a group, an organization, and they were talking about more their managed detection and response type services that they really want to start to evaluate. But this was a very large organization. Right? This was not like, Bob the baker trying to figure out, hey, how can I enhance even my cybersecurity footprint? This was a very large enterprise, mid-enterprise type organization. What was kind of a bit surprising to me is this kind of life cycle of, hey, there has been a detection, what do we do? How do we get to resolution? They really did not have a clear understanding of what to do. They did not have great planning. So I feel that across the industry, having something, like you said, security by default, right? These things are now prepackaged. It's already in place. It's only going to help with that level of planning because the expertise is very difficult to attain.
Definitely. And I think this is where also in this planning and be prepared the scenario is where this third point of disaster recovery automation can also help, because it's yet another topic where you usually see a lot of documentation that normally is quite static. Someone did
and
it.
stale, as we can say that here, right? It's quite often it's not kept up to date.
Exactly. So what if the tool can do that for you? I mean, maybe you need some insight at the beginning, but you end up with something dynamic, updated, and useful when it needs to be used. So I think this is definitely another area where we will see improvements in many players in the market.
So disaster recovery as a service, automation and detection. Now, we have this is one of two little be cautious statements, right? There is a lot of marketing around quote unquote DR automation and orchestrating and things like that. But, we encourage clients to say there will be work done here and there is a lot of runway to be able to enhance this as a service, but it's complex and it's probably not where the marketing says some of these solutions are at. What are your thoughts on this on a whole?
Wow. Yeah, I mean, it's caution, certainly. But again, it's horses for courses. Lots of services have a time and a place, and it may be an important string to the bow, if you like. But yeah, caution. So, for example, data security and compliance, at least verify that the provider complies with regulations relevant to your industry. So it goes back to what we were just saying, all about compliance, GDPR, HIPAA, PCI DSS, things like that. This is crucial for industries with stringent data protection requirements. So another example would be data sovereignty. Where will the actual data live? Where? Are you sure Some providers might store data in regions with weaker data protection laws, and you can imagine why they might want to do that, but that doesn't mean you want it to happen. And that can lead to potential legal and compliance risks. So there would be some of the things on my mind to be careful about there.
Yeah, and I would say if we go to this specific area of disaster recovery. So I said, what if they are done right automatically? But there's a next step. Is not only to create a disaster recovery plan, it's about running it, right? To deciding it, to put it in place. So, and here is where I really think that we need to be cautious. Because one thing is to have a plan as a reference and then a decision, a human being can decide what to do. And another thing is to run it automatically. And if there is something wrong in it, you may end up with overridden services, hosts where you didn't want, or things like that, right?
That's right.
So this is, I would say, one of those fields where automation is good up to some level, but not to cover everything.
Exactly. Yeah. Unfortunately, on that one, there is no big red easy button, right? But we have a nice big red AI disclaimer for this, because this is the topic, of course, of AI and AI's value and what it could possibly bring, etc. But we have a cautious note around disaster recovery service or automated or orchestrated DR failure. But we got a nice big red disclaimer, we feel, around AI, and it's not being in bold red as in to be afraid. It's more understand where we're at in the hype cycle here and the value that it really can bring versus the aggressive marketing that's happening in the world today on AI, right? When we put this together, we start talking about how AI can help with continuity and some of these cool points that we have here. We felt that this was pretty important to note to clients.
Yeah, it is. Look, it's got a role to play, absolutely, and it's going to get better going forwards. I think AI may offer a way to take a lot of the slow, tedious elements out of this kind of work. I'm really talking about setup. But relying on AI to actually orchestrate a serious disaster recovery situation, that's a very, very different thing. You know, extreme care needs to be taken here. So, and also, you know, whatever the cause of the disaster was may be really important. A disaster situation, by definition, it's a disaster. It's a very dynamic and dangerous and moving situation to be in. You know, is it a threat actor that's behind it? Or is it climate change?
Yeah.
Human error, something else.
Yeah.
And this, of course, may change dynamically the nature of the recovery, how, where to, etc. So definite care needs to be taken. But I think AI can definitely, and we're working on ways for it to be able to give pre-warnings or to be able to take a lot of the drudge work out of setup.
That would be, because, you know, we talked a little bit around disaster recovery and continuity, right? And even Jorge, in just our last slide, you mentioned, wouldn't it be great if AI could update our disaster recovery plans, right? As things within our technical environment change. You know, that I think that as a use case for AI could be, you know, very logical and very attainable. But we think that there'll be a lot of good movement in backup management and automation. This is where AI can probably have some immediate impacts.
Yeah, I think that, and this is even in relation with security itself. I mean, thinking or not about AI, but thinking about automation in the backup management. If you are able to automate every time you need to create a new backup, a new routine, a new element to protect, you will be able to avoid many human mistakes. And human mistakes, when you try to back up something in these, let's say, routinary operations, can cause to not be protecting something that could be very important. So here you are able to automate this. I think it will help. And definitely AI is a very good tool to do that kind of automation. But I would like to just add here and connect it with the previous things you both said. So we can see here that there are very security critical operations and others that may maybe not be so critical to execute. And many times those very critical are tied with the complexity. We have talked a lot about disaster recovery, but it's very important to do that distinction on what is the criticality of each operation, and then it will be easier to think if it's a good candidate to automate with AI or not, but to automate or not. Because remember, we have talked about multi-person authorization, and if we need more than one people to authorize something, just imagine that AI takes all the decisions, right?
Does that mean we need two AI things to do authorization then? Jorge, is that where you're going? Can't be one AI component making all the decisions, but let's have two, and then that way we have two AI components turning keys and deleting backups and things like that.
That would be interesting.
Yeah, the battle of the AIs. Yeah.
I think overall we're still slightly in favor of the human touch.
Yeah, indeed.
Exactly.
The last point here, we say long-term data retention, and we have automated lifecycle management. I think is a broader topic. I think this is something that AI will be able to help with, right? Maybe being able to identify, not maybe. I think there's early indicators that there's some kind of beta versions of things out there that have this capability. But being able to identify something that's PII and classifying it properly, and then having a retention around that classification, ensuring compliance, or looking at things like archiving, this piece of data has not been touched in a long time and doesn't fit the data classifications within PII or put me out of compliance, put it to some nice cheap disk or cheap blob storage or cold storage, and away we go.
Yeah, again, I think this is a really good use case for AI, because I can see so many added services once you have your data perfectly classified with all kind of tags and categories. You can take decisions on it, right? Because of sensitivity, if it's used or not, if critical or not, and take decisions. So today this is possible, but you need to do it upfront. When you are configuring your data, you need to decide, okay, I'm getting data from this host and I classify it like this. But AI, we know that is very good to find patterns in data. So
Yes.
to ingest massive data and do that automatically, I think it would be really great.
I agree. I think we mentioned this before, right? If any product or platform has access and views into a company's entire data footprint, it's going to be the data protection platform, right? Again, assuming that it's implemented properly. So, AI having that capability now, you could get into some governance issues, perhaps, okay, great. You have all this data footprint to be able to analyze, but what kind of stays within your walls? What perhaps goes out to a cloud services to do that level of analysis, right? There's a lot of gray there that needs to be considered.
Exactly. You need to decide when the AI engine is going to play a role. Maybe in some situations it can play a role, maybe in others not, because we have talked a lot about compliance. So you need to balance what you can do, what you cannot. And it's definitely complex. Also, because of the permissions. Of course, if you are touching all the data of the organization, you need to be careful and not send it without thinking through an external software that is doing something that you are not controlling, right? So
that you don't want it to do. Yeah. Yeah, indeed. I think across all these options where AI can help, it's, as we put up here, study your data, understand the use case that you're looking to solve, right? And understand that while AI will be and continue to be a powerful tool as it moves forward, it doesn't mean it can do everything, right? And just don't look at it as this is going to solve all the problems. I mean, there's a journey here, and we're just literally in the first steps of that journey as it relates to AI.
That's right. And if it can just take some of the load, great.
Yes. Yeah. Well, gentlemen, this is our contact information. This was a great conversation. I thank the both of you for joining, and we'll have this recording buttoned up, and then we can get it out to anybody who would like to listen to it. I think we covered off a fantastic amount of points. Just even conversationally, what we didn't have in bullet points, we talked about a lot of different feature sets, considerations, and what we think the future might look like. But I think we can all agree that, this is still what used to be the kind of old, boring world of backup and recovery is now become immensely dynamic and is now top of what used to be almost sold as an insurance policy, right? Okay, you may never have a flood, but just in case, you should do it. That whole dynamic's changed. It's now a cybersecurity play. It's now top of the house as it relates to organizations saying, we need to protect our data and we need to understand exactly what's going on at every step of the way.
Yeah, so be ready. Yeah, thank you. Troy, thanks a lot for having us today. We appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Love to set another one up, and we'll pick a different topic, and we'll dive into, Rob, your head coaching capabilities, perhaps at the Olympic level. That is that's something that I'm not going to lie, it's intrigued me. So we'll dive into it. Thanks again, gentlemen. It was great talking with you.
Thank you very much, sir.
Take care.
It was a pleasure. Bye.